Welcome to Quality Time with MoreSteam. I am your host, Dan Swartwout. Today, I am joined by Joe Baker. Joe has spent his career at the intersection of people, process, and technology. Joe got his start bagging groceries at 17, became the youngest store manager in his company's history at 24, and went on to run a billion-dollar business for Hertz at 32. It's a really cool story. You'll hear more about it during this episode. Joe is a Lean Six Sigma black belt, a self described servant leader, and someone who believes that a great culture is the foundation of a great organization. Today, Joe is the COO of Veritext, one of the largest legal solutions providers in North America. I have a lot of fun in this episode. I think you will too. Joe is a great guest. So now, my conversation with Joe Baker. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by the COO of Veritext, Joe Baker. Welcome to the show.
Dan, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to join you today. And my partnership with MoreSteam goes back, a couple decades now. So I'm really excited to re-engage here today.
We are excited to have you on the show. Of course, our president here at MoreSteam, Peg Pennington, had a meeting with you and was like, we have to get Joe on the podcast. We did a call beforehand because I hadn't met you before. And then I was like, Peg, like always, you are right again. We need to get Joe on the podcast. I'm so excited for today's conversation. Before we jump in, could you give us, Joe, a little bit about your background, your accomplishments, and what led you to where you are today?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking, Dan. I grew up in Philadelphia and, in kind of a blue collar household. We didn't have a lot of money, but my parents really taught me to pursue my goals and my dreams. And so I've always been very driven. And I started out early on in the retail industry. Was a very young store manager in a grocery chain called Gennardi's, which eventually sold to Safeway. But I started there in high school bagging groceries with a bow tie on. And I fell in love with the culture of the business, the way they delivered value in a differentiated way. At 17 years old, I kind of got that. And so I fell in love with that business. I wanted to be a store manager someday. And at 24 years old, I became the youngest store manager in the company's history. So that was incredible. And I share with my kids today, if you can ever do anything in your career early on, work in retail, work in the restaurant industry, get into hospitality, because you're going to touch everything that you're going to need in life: leadership, client service, logistics. And I got all that stuff in the supermarket industry. So I went in to run a super Walmart at 26 years old, $100 million
Wow.
super center. Hardest job I've ever had. And I talk about this a lot today. Those early experiences as I got later in my career were gems. Didn't realize it at the time, but so many of the lessons of those experiences pay dividends today when I deal with larger challenges. And so I'm grateful for that. Yeah, I was a Philadelphia education guy. I went to a small school called Widener University. And they got my master's at Villanova. And did some post grad work at the University of Penn. So my roots in education have always been in Philly, but my career has gone many places. And so, I got out of retail right after I graduated from my MBA. I went over to Hertz rental car, which is another dynamic industry, a lot of kind of experiences there. And at 32 years old, I moved to Los Angeles and ran a billion-dollar business for them. So uh,
Wow.
had a ton of experience, people, process, and technology, as I always talk about. And that's really where I got introduced to Lean Six Sigma and to MoreSteam through my Hertz journey. And then later career, where I'm at today, I was a COO of a transportation company that I was there for about 5 years. We grew the business through a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And now at Veritext, we really do what I call human powered technology legal solutions. And a big part of what we do is court reporting and videography, but we've introduced so much technology into how we do that. And the story is about people, of how we build capabilities and really develop talent, but then stack technology on top of that. So it's been a great career journey. On the side, I work with autistic kids a little bit. I'm on the board of a school called Spectrum 360, the largest autistic program in New Jersey. And I really enjoy that because my stepson is autistic, and that has taught me so much about the potential of people, and how you can really unleash that if you understand where people are coming from.
Joe, thank you so much for all of that. And I wanted to touch upon, you said to early on, the advice would be get in the restaurant industry, retail, because you touch upon everything such as logistics. Another benefit, like me, when I was in college, I worked in the restaurant industry, and that's where I met my wife because she worked at the same restaurant. So there's other life benefits potentially as well for that great advice. And also, when we were on the phone earlier, you told a great story about getting into Villanova's MBA program. Could you share that with us here on the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, as I shared, I came from very humble beginnings, first college graduate in in my family on both sides. And Villanova, when they won the NCAA tournament in 1985, I was 5 years old. They were an 8 seed, still the lowest
Ed
seed ever.
Pinkney, right?
Yeah, Ed Pigney. Yeah, great memory. Georgetown had a guy by the name of Patrick Ewing, and they were
You
a
a
14
little bit
point
of a memory of
leader.
him.
And I remember watching that on TV because that was like the first Philadelphia championship for me. And so throughout my life, I wanted to go to Villanova. And I didn't get in for my undergraduate. Then I went into Widener. I graduated in 3 years with honors. I worked full time. So I was very driven. And when I got done, I said, this MBA thing has to happen. I applied at multiple, good schools. A lot of them let me in right away. They were going to waive credits, and Villanova kind of paused a little bit. It was probably the best school at the time on my list. And I got a call from the dean. I was at work, and a personal call. And he said to me, Joe, I'm calling one person, and I usually call one person a year. And it's usually that person who has a great resume, like your body of work, your references are incredible, your academic record, but I can't let you in with the score that you got on your GMAT test. And he said, look, if you can improve your score in the next 30 days, I'll give you the spot. So the obvious question was, okay, well, what do I need to get that score to, and how probable is that? And he said, well, that's the right question. He said, you need to move it about 80 points. And he said, statistically, the average person doesn't move it more than 30. So it's against odds that you'll be able to do this. So I decided not to take the test, but I did say, save the spot for me because I will be back. And he did. And for 6 months, took all the practice tests, did all those kind of fun things. And I took the test again. And as soon as you're done on the computer, right away it flashes the score. And when the score flashed up, it was more than 80 points higher
Wow.
than the first time. And so I squeaked into Villanova. And it was a great moment in my life and a reminder, if you believe in anything in your potential, don't give up on it. That belief is put in your heart for a reason. And it was great. And I went to Villanova, did some great things academically, and then they won two more NCAA tournaments. So that was a gravy on top.
Joe, you've been referred to as an executive change agent and servant leader. When you look back over your career, what's the thread connecting retail, Hertz, National Express, Veritext? What's the thread that is continuous throughout?
Yeah, Dan, I always look at it through three lenses. Whenever you're transitioning between industries or you go into a new leadership role, to me, it's always people, process, and technology. And I always look at things between that lens. The product, right? Whether you're at Walmart and you're selling, retail goods, or you're in insurance and you're selling policies, right? You're digging ditches. It doesn't matter what it is. The product to me is a widget and it can be learned. But the real magic of being successful as a leader is being curious, always putting the people first. And that's why I always anchor on those early kind of retail, restaurant, hospitality, because the biggest thing you learn how to do is to deal with people, how to
Mhm.
lead people, how to influence people. You find out what makes them tick. And so the process stuff, to me, that's where the Lean Six Sigma and building the skills of being able to look at a process with data and improvement is very valuable. and technology helps us do that. But the people is the foundation of all of that. Any organization I've been in has always been successful when it's founded on great culture and really great leadership that develops capabilities in people. And then you build the business on top of it. So that thread, as you kind of asked, it's people, process, and technology, but people at the foundational level always is the thing that you have to build on top of.
When you first went to work at the grocery store at 17, and was that your first job, your very
It
first
was.
job?
It was.
What did you notice about leadership from that young age that worked and didn't work that maybe you've carried on with you throughout all of this time?
Great question there. So the company called Gennardi's was a specialty kind of supermarket chain. So they did things that no one else did that now you see everywhere, which gourmet foods, like it wasn't just like you go get your canned goods. They had all the specialty things. So their store traffic was like double what the average supermarket was because people went there for the experience, not to
Mhm.
buy something, but the experience of I'm not going to get something, but I'm going to hang out. And I could immediately at 17 appreciate how that was happening. But here's the special part of how they did it. The way they recruited great people, including 17-year-old baggers, they were very selective of who got in their culture. Everything from the interview process, not everyone got in at 17, to when you got in there, their training program, and they're really focused on what they call legendary service. And I still
Mhm.
love that today. But, Lean Six Sigma, you guys live in this world of voice of the customer. To them, legendary service meant you always start with the customer and you work backwards in terms of how you design your experience. But the way to the customer is through employees. So it's
Mhm.
it's almost like this idea that the employee is more important than the customer, which means you hire the best people, you develop them in the skills needed, but then you treat them really well. And that was really what resonated for me. Great leadership in the store, people that were interested in what was going on in your life, scholarships for people that were going to go to college that they still wanted to maybe work and they didn't have the money. They had programs like that. They had something called incentive dollars where if you got caught doing something right in the store, you got these incentive dollars, which you could use in the store to buy lunch and different things. Very simple, basic tactics, but transformational in terms of how you build a $1 billion company, which is eventually what it was when it sold. So I got this kind of case study at 17 that I never read about in a book, but I experienced it and it was very, very influential in who I became as a leader.
Why do you think that was? Because most people, when they get a job at 17, it's to have money for the weekend and that's it. But obviously, this experience had a profound impact on you. Why do you think it made such an impact on you as opposed to many people when they're in their first job in high school?
And for me, and this is why this is such a very special experience for me, and I'm glad you asked about it. This job at 17 helped me identify my purpose in life. And like most 17-year-olds, and I have three teenagers right now, and the obvious question is, what are they going to do when they grow up, and how do we influence them and guide them? But they don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what they're going to do, and I was confused. I was lost at 17. I was an athlete. I was fairly popular, kind of in the middle, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And then when I walked in that supermarket, I felt a sense of connection to something bigger than me. And I talk about this today as I've kind of had the privilege of leading larger groups of people, and it is a privilege when you become a more senior level leader. It is about servant, and it is about rising other people up and helping them fulfill their dreams by stepping back. But for me, that was so powerful to have that experience where I felt connected to something. So as I've kind of grown as a leader, my philosophy is you create purpose for the organization by making it a shared purpose.
Mm.
And what that means is every single person on the team knows exactly what that North Star is. But more importantly, they know how their contributions connect to it. And that is what motivates people to show up in a different way. And that's what I got at Gennardi's. And ultimately, I learned wow, no matter where I go, if I could help create that for other people, then there's a really good chance not only am I going to be successful, but I'm going to help other people be successful. And I'm probably going to be part of something that in a business really translates into value. And that has been kind of the case in anywhere I've ever been able to lead and to grow.
Well, let's talk about some of the places where you've been able to lead and grow. Obviously, you've been a part of a lot of organizations, a lot of very successful organizations that you've been a key participant in. When you step into a new operation for the first time, what are the first few things that tell you where the best opportunities for improvement or change are?
Yeah, I love that question, and I'll kind of answer it with what I've learned a lot from MoreSteam and Lean Six Sigma, and it's we have this thing that we call doing the Gemba. People that are in this process excellence world, and the idea of doing the Gemba is you learn by walking around. You when you come into something new, especially if you're a leader and you don't know the business, the people that are in that business not only know it better than you, but they will always know it better than you, especially the ones that have grown up. And so you have to go into me with curiosity, humility, and this attitude of the best way to learn how to help these people and make this better business overall is to actually observe and ask questions and find out where the best ideas are. And the best ideas I've ever learned of in my career have come from frontline employees. And what I mean by that are the employees that are having the direct interactions with the client and the customer. So it kind of comes back to that Gennardi story. If you want legendary customer service in what you do, yes, you want to be able to map and understand what the value is for the customer. But the best way to get that is actually through your frontline employees. So that for me has been the kind of the special sauce is any time I've started something new is getting in there early, building trust, being humble, curious, answering questions that ultimately the people on the front lines have the answers to. So to me, and there's a lot of fun in that because people love to talk about what they do. And that's one of the great joys of my job is what do you think about this? Tell me what's made you successful. And you watch somebody smile when they talk about it. Uh, to me, that's when as you ask, like when you're in a great culture, when people are smiling when they're talking about what they do. And then if they can map it to that North Star, then you got really something special because it means that shared purpose is probably taking shape.
Do you think, as you look back when you were 17 years old and you had no idea, as nobody had any idea when they're that age, of what the Gemba was, where you actually experienced that and didn't even know it at the time? A leader is going to the Gemba and they're coming to you, and you didn't know what that was all about. But is there something like that that stuck with you all these years?
That's it's interesting you say that and you reflect back on these experiences. One of the great mentors that I had in my life when I was at Gennardi's, there's this guy by the name of John Vodo. And John was the vice president of employee relations. And John grew up in the business. He was a meat cutter, became a store manager. So his career progression was somebody that not only had respect because he had done all of the things, but he had this amazing humanness about him. And what I loved about him is I loved to wear a tie when I became a manager. Now I hate wearing a tie. But in the beginning of my career, I loved wearing a tie. And when John Vodo would visit the store, he always looked so sharp to me. Like he really took pride in the way he presented himself. And he always had these cool like knots in the way that he did his tie. But when John would walk, he would stop and talk to every single person. And when he would, even at 17, the first time I met him, he walked up to me and he looked me in the eye and he asked me who I was, what I did in the store. But he said it in such a genuine way where I felt like I knew this man my entire life and I had just met him. And so, to answer your question, I think sometimes as a leader, we underestimate the impact we can have on other people. The impact we can have in not only connecting with them and understanding what's important to them, but the ability to tap into something that might be there that nobody else has before. And so, to answer your question, yes. I mean, I've learned that by watching really great leaders. And as I've grown in my career, what's the playbook? To me, the playbook is you model the best leaders that you ever had the chance to follow. And in the case of John Vono, he's that person for me at 17 that's the guy I want to be like.
I think this is a good question when talking about management, leadership, and what happens on the front line. Can you talk about a time in your career where a process evolved significantly from its original design once it hit the front line? Maybe because of what you learned at the Gemba and what you learned from that experience as a whole.
Yeah, great question. And I'll always anchor this back to Lean Six Sigma, because Lean Six Sigma for me, I'm a black belt now, but I was introduced to the program in 2011 when I was at Hertz. And at the time, Hertz was going through a massive transformation. And as a result of that, looking for ways to improve client satisfaction, but really improve their processes in the field. And they brought in MoreSteam and some other consultants to really work with operators on how to improve everything from how do you have better logistics and productivity in the way that you move your cars around, which there's a lot of activity there. There's a lot of inefficiency to, hey, these are some things that if we could do this better, the client would get, a better experience. So the great story for me was 2011. I worked with this guy by the name of Pat DiGirolamo, who actually helped Jeffrey Liker write the book, The Toyota Way, which is all about manufacturing and Lean Six Sigma and efficiency. And what we had at Hertz is we had the guys that clean the cars. They're guys and ladies as well. They were called vehicle service attendants, and there were about 100 of them, and each of them would clean a car individually. And then basically you clean the car, you drive it through the car wash, you put it in the stall. The problem with that model was there was a lot of variation. Out of the 100 people cleaning the cars, the productivity levels were very different by person. And the end outcome of the car, the quality of it, and we measured this through NPS, we would survey clients. What we saw was a lot of variation in the quality of the car. So we said, this is something that we want to get better consistency and maybe better productivity from the workforce. This is where Lean Six Sigma and the real purpose of it really kind of clicked for me. Instead of just coming in and saying, we're going to change the process, this guy, Pat, who was an expert on this, said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do what's called a Kaizen, this whole idea of continuous improvement, of bringing together the people that are doing the work into the room with management. We're going to talk about all the things that happened today, the good, the bad, the ugly. And we are going to have a conversation around what maybe good to great looks like. And I remember being very skeptical about this. So, this was frontline employees that didn't trust management. They were union employees. There wasn't a lot of trust there. And after 3 days, what I saw transform in these individuals and really in myself and my perception of how change happens was this whole idea that you solve problems in the business by bringing people together to solve them as a unit. It's back to that shared purpose. But instead of telling these people that were the experts in their job, this is the way we're going to do it, we let them tell us what would make their job better and easier. We talked about their frustrations. We talked about the tools they didn't have. The vacuum doesn't work really well. Every time I go through the car wash, the rocker panel doesn't hit the bumper. So I have to get out of the car and I have to scrub the, mosquitoes off the front. These amazing things that you never would have understood and then solved for that as a unit. Where that ended up going is we went from cleaning cars individually to creating a team cleaning concept called the pit crew. So now it was 4 people cleaning a car at once, divided out by sections with standardized work. MoreSteam, you're very familiar with that. The transformation was people not only were having fun because they were on teams, we started to score and keep metrics on how everyone was doing. It was a fun, competitive way to get people connected to that shared purpose. The NPS scores went through the roof. Way better client satisfaction. The productivity levels went up, and everything about the culture improved. So to me, that was one of the greatest cases as I've kind of carried Lean Six Sigma into other organizations of the power of bringing people together and to really focus on that people first, as I talked about, and that culture. The process has to be built on top of that, and then ultimately technology. But that's how you really plug in, is you involve people.
I think that is a very interesting case study that you just talked about because for me, as a consumer of rental cars, there's not a whole lot of difference. I go to the counter, I get my mid-size SUV or sedan, regardless of what make and model it is. And I want a clean car. I want a good experience. But at the end of the day, there's not a tremendous amount of difference from what you're receiving as a product. So you had to identify that the difference is cleaning the cars in a way that improves satisfaction of the customer, voice of the customer. So, how do you go about doing that in any type of industry where the end product is relatively the same, but we've got to differentiate ourselves in a way that appeals to the customer? I'm curious about that because I would never think about my first initial thought with that would be, well, let's get better cars. Let's get newer cars. Let's speed up some type of automated process with check-ins. But you dialed in on what the real issue was. How do you do that in any type of industry where you've got to differentiate yourself?
Yeah, a great question. I'm going to always bring it back to this people, process, and technology, because to me, those are the things when you bring them together that help you create the value that is what differentiates you. But to your point, the bigger a company gets, the more it scales, the more competitive it's going to be. And
Mhm.
they call it a game of inches, right? In the business I'm in today, legal technology, it's service and it's our technology. It's those inches that playing at the margins that make the difference in who gets the business, who sustains it, who grows it. So to me, it's the people, process, technology, and bringing that together. Now, the way that you do that, we just talked about how important the people part is and leadership and involving them. I put that at the top because it's the foundation, but it holds the entire house together, right? So that's got to be there. But here's where process to me gets really fun. Working on process only works really well if you have great data to drive that. And so, yeah, and this is also what I learned through MoreSteam. We talked about the voice of the customer and working backwards. Well, how do you get the voice of the customer? Well, I already mentioned that you have to get it through the employees that interact with them, but you also have to have really good data, in my experience. And so you need mechanisms to capture information in a very intentional way, analytics that can help you tend to see what the broader trends are of what's happening, identify friction points, value points, and do that in a very granular way. So when we were at Hertz, we use the NPS, which is Net Promoter Score. It's basically surveying clients, but mapping an NPS program that really asks the right questions that give you the intuitive information you're going to need to figure out where you need to differentiate. And then you have to build that into your system. And what that means is you don't just capture data, but then you have to organize that data. So you have to have really good business intelligence systems that help us understand and interpret what's there. And then you have to design that in terms of how you go to market next. And that could be in the new technology that you bring that's going to use that data to make those connection points better for clients, maybe reduce friction in the business. But the other thing is you use that data to strengthen your capabilities with your people. And that's the best thing that you can do for leadership is whatever business you're in, have really good data sets, have good management dashboarding so your managers can see what's going on in real time if you can get it to that level, and then training the capabilities of using that information to make people better at their jobs in their service delivery. And the best way to do this to me, and I think in this age of artificial intelligence, everyone's asking the question, how are you using AI? To me, that's not the question. AI is here. I think the
Mhm.
question for me is, how are you empowering human beings to leverage AI in your business? That's where things get special for me. So to me, what that means is, how can AI take all this data, organize it faster, make it better, put it at the fingertips of a human being who can now really add value to the client through the interactions in a new way. And that could be offering new products. It could be elevating or customizing a service delivery in real time to match exactly what that client needs in the moment. To me, that's where people, process, technology really comes together and gets really exciting when you're a leader in business, being able to bring that stuff front and center.
I want to get into leadership in just one moment because obviously that is one of your areas of expertise. But I wanted to make one statement and then have a follow up question about surveys. My first statement is after listening to what you just said, I immediately thought of Al Pacino's Game of Inches speech from Any Given Sunday. And it's like, when you talk about that principle across different industries, the principle of gridiron American football, it's a game of inches, just like business. And so I'm going to go watch that speech after our interview here today. I might even link that here. Well, I won't link it in the show notes because it might not be safe for work. But um, like, I wanted to ask you about surveys and my experience with surveys and your thought on this. This is something that happened to me. My car got hit, so I had to take my car to an auto body shop. I don't know much about cars. I'm not a car guy. I want a car that's safe. I want a car that's reliable. But what can I tell you about my car? Only that it's safe and reliable. I don't know what's under the hood. I couldn't change my oil. I don't know anything about it. So I took my car to the body shop. I got my car back. They gave me a survey. I didn't think I knew enough about cars to give a 10 because I thought, how am I supposed to know you did perfectly when I don't have perfect knowledge of cars? So I gave an 8, what I thought was a good score. I got a call from the manager of that auto body shop asking if I was trying to get her fired. And I was like, huh? And she's like, if I get anything below a 10, it's considered terrible. Anything below a 10 out of 10. And I said, I'm trying to give you a good score. An 8, I thought that was good. And I based that on my own lack of knowledge. So that's almost made me question surveys in general because the idea is it's either a perfect score or it's no good. But how do you improve when there's only a perfect score or a terrible score? There's got to be scores that are good, but room for improvement. How do you deal with surveys in that regard with people who are like me, somewhat leery of filling them out after an experience like that?
I love the question. And here's what I will share based on my experience. So I've seen mechanisms of surveying clients, right, to get client satisfaction done really well. And I've seen it done the wrong way too. And so to me, here's what the wrong way looks like. It's a little bit of what you just shared is it's focusing so much on the score that you lose sight of why you're asking the question to begin with. And to me, that's where the substance of a good program comes in. So, in Veritext, we get 15,000 surveys a year. We have an NPS north of 70. We've improved that score through Lean Six Sigma and very data-driven dashboarding and analytics, but it's how we're using the data that's in between the margins that really makes a difference. And that's where I think a good program makes sense because what we're doing is it's not just about the overall score. We're asking attribute questions, and those attribute questions have been mapped very intentionally to the things that we have learned from clients are most important to them. So
Mm.
they score multiple things, not just the overall, but then we purposely introduce certain questions in there to give us qualitative feedback on the things that are going to allow us to go deeper. And then we aggregate that entire kind of data set to figure out how do we make our process better. It could be an individual situation, right? How does this client specifically need something different from us? But to me, that's where the value is. It's not just in the score, it's in how you aggregate the data, how you connect it to the clients, and then more importantly, how do you drop back? Getting 5 surveys is very different from getting 15,000 like we do at Veritext. So you want to have a data set that's statistically significant for you, but you also want to have really good mechanisms in how you're using that feedback to arm people and to really kind of level up not just your process, but your design of new things. So we think about the way you capture NPS or client satisfaction is being very strategic. Yes, we have one-on-ones. We get back to a client, right? If somebody says they had a challenge or an idea, that's a really important part of it. But to me, it's the strategy of how you're using that data to really differentiate yourself. And again, in a game where it's 1%, the margins are very thin.
Thanks, Joe. So far, I rate this episode 10 out of 10. We'll see if my rating changes after this short break. MoreSteam's enterprise process improvement platform includes the tools, training, and software you need to transform your organization into a problem-solving powerhouse. Join the ranks of Fortune 500 companies that trust MoreSteam for their enterprise process improvement. Visit MoreSteam.com to learn more. Also, I want to take just a moment to thank you for listening to Quality Time with MoreSteam. You can email the show at qualitytime@moresteam.com. And if you're enjoying the show, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. And now back to my conversation with Joe Baker. Now, I want to pivot a little bit to talking more about leadership because you've drawn on John Maxwell's work and run your own leadership training company. What have you brought into your COO roles? And what has surprised you most about applying those lessons in an operational setting?
Yeah, great question. That kind of old, I think it was a book, something like Everything I Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten. I
I
probably have
remember
that
that
wrong.
one.
Yeah, yeah. Like you and I have already talked about, everything I've needed to learn about leadership, I learned at 17 in the grocery store. And I say that very intentionally, that I mean that. To me, and this is where the privilege of being a leader, and if you're in a business and we have 1,500 employees at Veritext, and I consider it a privilege to be able to serve them every day. And so to me, the greatest joy of doing what I do every day is to be able to say, I've met John Maxwell many times and done things in his coaching. He's written 100 books, served millions and millions of people in terms of his leadership. But when I was 17, I was reading his books and
At
making notes.
17?
Yeah, and then writing all these notes about concepts. The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard, you might
Oh,
remember.
yeah. Oh,
Now,
yeah.
I used the techniques in that book from 17 through college when I was managing people twice my age to really learn how to interact. So I was using these things at a young age. And what they taught me is basically no different than what I know today, which is it's all about human beings. It's all about connecting. And so in my job, the privilege that I get is I spend probably 80% of my time coaching and developing people.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is on strategy and how do we drive the business? How do we implement new technology? How do we deliver our value proposition for our investors? All of that is there. But when I think about the how, to me, it's really about enabling people to be the best version of themselves. And I take that very seriously. Succession planning, but it's a lot of those basic concepts of really how do you influence people? How do you connect with people? Right. And then how do you help people achieve their goals? That's the best part about leadership. The more senior you become, the less it becomes about you. And the more it becomes about putting other people forward. And to me, that's just so exciting to let go of things and empower somebody else to step forward and then to see them many times surpass not only any idea you could have come up with, but sometimes surpassing even your capabilities and having an attitude of enjoying that. To me, that's one of the great things that makes me smile, in my leadership is being able to do that.
When you're reading these books at 17, did you have any other friends reading books like that? Because I remember at 17, the thing I read the most was the USA Today sports section. And that's what my friends were reading. So we had lots to talk about. I mean, did you find other people? Were you able to gravitate towards other people who were thinking and talking about the same things?
No, it's so funny you say this. I was so focused on my own personal development when I was young, maybe to a fault, because I learned later in life to slow down a little bit, and
Uh-huh.
and to realize that sometimes you're enough. You don't always have to go get more. But at that age, and this is true, At 17, my Christmas list for my mom and my girlfriend were about 15 to 20 leadership books. And it was all my favorite authors. And Christmas morning, it was mostly Jack Welch and it was mostly John Maxwell. And I can remember sitting in bed Christmas morning, like flipping through these things. And later in life, I had this incredible opportunity to meet John Maxwell many times, but also meet Jack Welch about a decade ago. And I got to
Wow.
ask Jack Welch a question in a small town hall with about 30 people. And what I asked him about was, I was in rental car at the time, which wasn't the most glamorous business. It wasn't Google, right? We didn't have free cereal and Big Bang. People were out renting cars in the England weather. Like, it's not an easy job, I'm not sure for everybody that does that. And I asked him, I said, how do you attract people to a brand like this when it's hard, And he looked me right in the eye and he said, Joe, you got a great story and you got to tell it. And when I reflect back on all those books I read when I was 17, Jack Welch has been known for creating value in businesses, being probably one of the most famous CEOs of all time in terms of speaking and how you scale and how you do. But his real story, if you read about Jack Welch, it's about people. It's about developing people. He was a PhD, he was, in chemistry. I mean, he's a scientist basically. And he was hard nosed in how he drove his business. But the real core of him, he cared about people and he believed the best way to scale people is to be able to lead people and to put people first. So those are all the things that I learned at a very early age, and they're still very true to me today. They're paramount. When you're in leadership, it's about people first, and everything else is secondary to that. But if you do that really well, you have the opportunity to do some really incredible things that create business value from that.
Continuing on this thread of leadership, you've talked about the role of vulnerability in authentic leadership. And we've talked about that on the show a lot lately. Can you share a time when being open and genuine as a leader changed the trajectory of a team or initiative?
Absolutely. I'll be vulnerable right now because it's a recent story. Last year, my mom took a pretty nasty fall back in September. After a leadership meeting, we were in Texas. I got home and I got a phone call that my mom had fallen. And my dad had passed away a year before that. So my mom was starting to, I noticed, decline a little bit and struggling with things. And she fell and she got pretty badly hurt. She was in a rehab for a couple months. And then she had a stroke after we got her home. And we ended up having to bring her back into the rehab. The fourth quarter of last year was probably one of the most difficult in my life personally. And here's what got me through it. First of all, I work with the most incredible people I've ever worked with in my life. And I don't just say that. I've worked for some great companies and been a part of great cultures, but the team at Veritext is very special to me. And what makes us special, and I'll give Nancy Josephs, our founder, who's still on our board and was our CEO till a couple of years ago, Rich Antonek, who's our CEO now, also incredible in this way, but have always put people first as we have been successful growing the business. And what that means is actually caring about what's going on in people's lives and being there for one another when you go through difficult things. And, when you're more senior as a leader, it's not easy to say, I need help, and last year, I was struggling, trying to take care of my mom and, trying to stay focused on the business. And I was very vulnerable to tell people where I was at, to share transparently with large audiences of, hey, what was going on, what I was learning from it, but more importantly, what I needed help with. And the team rallied and helped get me personally through a difficult time, but the business thrived, at times when I couldn't maybe give it my best. And that is, I think, one of the greatest lessons of leadership that I have had to learn probably the long way is asking for help is not a weakness. It's actually a strength. Having the courage to be able to say, I don't know this as much as you do. Teach me about it. I don't know what to do in this situation. What are your thoughts? I'm going through something very difficult as a human being right now. Can you relate? All of those things I have found are the things that when you do them, you become a better leader just by doing them. And more importantly, you model for other people. Not only is that okay, but it's expected. You're expected to be human. You're expected to ask for help. And I think that's the way the best teams get the ideas, just like I talked about earlier. When you want to change the way you clean cars because there's a better way, you don't go out and tell the people cleaning the cars. When you don't do that, how it's going to happen. You involve them and you say, tell me what you think about this. How can we make this better for you? So asking for help would be really what I would say here is that's the best way to be vulnerable is to just do it.
That was an outstanding answer. Thank you so much. Joe, you're obviously very in tune as a leader, what is needed to be a leader. But you're also, as you've mentioned throughout the interview and throughout your career, you're very good with the data, the statistics, and the mathematical side of Lean Six Sigma. How do you know when to use what? Because sometimes you can be too technical when talking to people who maybe don't have the same understanding, or maybe you're talking to people who have the same understanding and you're not talking technical enough. So, how do you know to balance those two sides of Lean Six Sigma like you've been able to do so well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And which is why I'm so high on the model. And, in my career, I've had the opportunity to be a part of helping certify almost 300 leaders in different belt programs. At Veritext, we hit a very exciting milestone this year of 100. And when I came to the organization, nobody knew anything about this. It's scary. I had never really scaled something at enterprise level. It was scary for me. And, here's the way I kind of always approach it. First of all, I love the kind of the quote, like, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So
Hmm.
I talk about that a lot is data helps inform and start a conversation. But that's where the people comes together with the data part of it, right? Like you need really good data and you need to analyze it. But you can, I've seen analysis paralysis. I've seen companies where they're so focused on data, they make decisions only on data. They don't involve the people part of this. They don't develop the capabilities so people know how to work with data. But when you bring those two things together, you build capabilities so people learn how to use data. They learn how to make decisions on data. They learn how to have conversations about data, data points. They use data to inform the conversation, not the other way around. And so for me, that's kind of where the magic works. And to me, Lean Six Sigma and data, it doesn't have to be calculus. There's plenty of tools today that help us with those things. To me, it's what is the data storytelling? What does the data tell us that is going to help us kind of create the narrative here that's going to inform us on what we need to do next? And so I'm a big believer in helping people understand how they can use data to inform and have conversations, how they can use data to do storytelling. Back to the whole idea of you don't want to just have an opinion. If you want to ask for something from your boss, right? Like you're trying to, I need to get a resource and it's going to cost money. How do I get to yes? Learn how to position data as part of that conversation and it changes the game. And so that's what we really try and teach. We use data to help inform, to start the conversation. But then, more importantly, in the way we manage our business, I'm a big believer in business intelligence. And that is really creating the metrics in the business that matter. What are the things that we need to understand how they're performing? It could be productivity, it could be what we're monetizing in our business, putting that at the fingertips of people so that they can be insightful based on that information and make decisions on it, but also how to gamify the business. I talked about earlier about the vehicle service attendants cleaning the cars and how we scored them, and we had teams with different I love that sort of stuff. We have operational excellence awards in our business where once a quarter, and we have 800,000 people on these events on Zoom, where we give out awards on the right metrics and they're team awards. They're not individual. So I'm a believer in that data is like the scorecard, but then you have to create all of the process and the culture stuff around that. And that's where the really fun things happen. So data is an enabler. You don't rely on it by itself. but it's really a ticket to the dance of being able to guide your business in a very fun way, in my experience.
When answering this question, you can talk about something from your own experience or something you have seen elsewhere, but I love the idea of using data as part of your storytelling. I think that is a huge, huge point, and I'm so glad you brought it up. So, my question to you is, what is one of the best or the best times you've seen data used to tell a story? And why was that the best? How was that done?
I'm not going to give myself credit for this because I saw someone else do it 20 years ago with something with Steve Jobs. But I recently did a presentation with some leaders on how to do data storytelling. And the first slide I gave was a picture, and then two pictures together on the slide. So just two things. And the one picture was Steve Jobs holding up the iPad. If you remember that iconic picture when he walked out on stage and
'09 or 2010, whenever that was, right then?
yeah, the
Yeah.
entire world looked at this thing and said, I don't know what this is, but I know this is something really special. And next to that picture, I put up Apple's stock price from 2008, 2009, between the iPad, the iPhone, and eventually what became everything after that, the first $1 trillion company in market capitalization. To me, that's the slide of how an idea of one person as a leader. First of all, we talk a lot about leadership. There's a reason why the CEO has a high compensation package, but there's a reason why a really great CEO can transform ideas and transform a culture. And I think about that with somebody like Steve Jobs. It wasn't just about the product. It was about changing the way every single one of us uses that product in our lives. Maybe the most influential person over the last 100 years. So to me, that was it, right? As market cap, but one idea, one person. But there's countless examples of things like that in the world where just having something simple and a visual can do a lot more than a bunch of graphs or a bunch of charts, in my opinion.
And I know that was a great answer, by the way. And I do remember when that iPad was introduced, I knew I had to have one. So I
How
remember
did it
that.
happen, right?
I remember that so well.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I know from our initial conversation that you are a big sports fan. And one of the things you talked about was analysis by paralysis, and people get so wrapped up in data. That's become an issue in sports as we're talking about data and analysis. And sometimes you've got to maybe not ignore the data, but understand when you have a hunch that you think is right. So, a lot of times they're talking about these coaches being so wrapped up in the data that they're almost getting out of the flow of the game for when they could make a decision that maybe the data doesn't 100% support, but the flow of the game supports. So, how do you incorporate that? I know what the data says here, but I've got a hunch based on what I'm seeing. Do you ever incorporate that into your business, and how?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you hit a sore spot for me because I'm a big Philadelphia Eagles fan. We had a great Super Bowl run, in
Uh-huh.
24, 25. And honestly, when I watched my team this year and they struggled quite a bit, uh, I saw them relying a little bit more on what you're calling the analytics, which is what does the data tell us we should call in this situation? But the year before, when you're hungry to win and you don't have that Super Bowl, is making some of those tougher calls where it doesn't make sense and you have the momentum or you believe in a certain player and you know that this person will step up and make that play when you need it. I do see a lot of that in sports, and I think it's hurting it to some extent. Um, but back to business, and I think this ties in really well to what we just talked about with using data as a way to inform, but not relying on it to make really hard decisions in the business. And to me, I think this is, as a more senior leader in the business, you run into these things all the time. Sometimes there are decisions that make sense with data. They might be good for the business, but are they good for the customer? Are they good for the employees? Maybe it's good for this quarter, but is it good for us over the next 2 to 3 years? Right. And so I think as a senior leader, the data informs, but it's no different than anything else we talked about. That's where you bring in other stakeholders and perspectives to say, what do you think about this? Tell me all the reasons why or the risks that this maybe won't work. And so that's where I think data informs, it sets the table for a conversation. But as a senior leader in a business, I have always tried to rely more on my intuition. And that doesn't mean going things alone. My intuition has usually told me, this feels too good to be true. It looks good on paper. Back to what we just talked about, I need to ask for help. I need to
Mm-hmm.
get some perspectives from people that are smarter than me. I need to go down the front lines of the people that actually know what the clients are saying, not what I see in the NPS reports. And so again, it's really being where I started today as a leader, being humble, being curious, connecting with people. That's where we use data to become more informed by asking really good questions.
Joe, I'm going to bring what you just said back to sports because you've got Nick Foles on the front line. He's over there with Doug Peterson, the coach, the leader. There probably is no data whatsoever that suggests let's do the Philly special right here in the Super Bowl. And yet Doug Peterson listened to his guy on the front line and they went ahead and did it.
The picture is right behind me in my Eagle room in the back here. And it's an iconic play. You know, I'm obviously biased on this, but you're playing the Titan Patriots, right? The most successful organization. It's the Super Bowl. It's 4th down and goal. You have a
Uh-huh.
lead in the game. You have a lead in the game already. You kick the field goal. A backup quarterback goes to the sideline and says to the coach, "Do you want Philly?" And the coach, without hesitation, says, "Yeah, let's do it." I mean, so this coming back to everything we talked about today, starts with culture and people. It starts with the locker room. It starts with trust. If you want to build a successful business, don't do it on data and ideas. Take data and ideas and put it on top of a great culture where trust is foundational, where people have a shared purpose and they know what the North Star is and they know what their contributions do to it. That's where special things happen. And if you look at any successful business or sports team, you're going to see that they have that locker room. They have that culture that comes first. And that translates into great client service and all the other things today. But yeah, that was a really cool moment for somebody that was from Philadelphia. I'm glad you enjoyed it too.
I did enjoy it, and I have very fond memories of Nick Foles, even though he threw for 7 touchdown passes against my favorite team in 2013. Um, I'm a Raiders fan, and that was just another one. Everyone has their career day against the Raiders, but that's about to change. Joe, that was such a perfect way to end the program. That was fantastic. This discussion has been truly phenomenal. Before I let you go, is there anything we haven't touched upon yet that you'd like to say?
Dan, I first of all, I appreciate your time and the invite. And I want to make a plug for MoreSteam, who's just in my career has been very influential. Like Peg Pennington, your president, who I think is fantastic. This whole idea of building capabilities in your business through processes and having a system to do that. To me, being able to kind of add that on top of people leadership in my career, I'd have to say Lean Six Sigma, probably one of the most influential things academically that has helped me create value in businesses, but also in creating culture. Because I've seen so many people go through belt programs and become better thinkers, to think about root causes, to use data before they jump to conclusions. And I've just seen it transform the way people lead. So kudos to you and your organization. You're doing incredible things.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. That was so very kind of you to say. And of course, you are doing incredible things as well, which is why we wanted you on the show to share all of the incredible things that you're doing. And there have been so many great takeaways from our conversation here today. Thank you so much for joining us, Joe.
Yeah, Dan, it was a pleasure. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Quality Time with MoreSteam. Thanks again.